Welcome back. Well, remember last week we read a book called The Golden Rule, which talked about this idea that is in many cultures all over the world, which is, do to others as you would have them do to you, or as we in the Christian and Jewish faith sometimes say, love your neighbor as yourself. Well, what if your neighbor is not so great? What if you're not so great? What happens then? Let's read. The Forgiveness Garden, written by Lauren Thompson, with pictures by Christy Hale. Lauren was born in Oregon but grew up in Massachusetts, except for 2 years. When she was 8 and then she was 10, her family spent a year in the Netherlands, and they went to Dutch schools, and she learned a bit of Dutch, which she can no longer remember. She now lives in Brooklyn with her husband, and they have one son. Christy was born in Massachusetts but moved to California when she was 10, when she decided to become a writer and an illustrator. Back then, her best friend and her acted out the books they loved. Their favorite was Harriet the Spy, and they dressed in disguises and they roamed the neighborhood just like Harriet. And back at Spy headquarters, they shared their discoveries and soon began writing and illustrating their own stories every day after school. So let's read The Forgiveness Garden. There was a valley, and through the valley ran a stream. The village of Vayam stood on one side, and the village of Gamte stood on the other. There was no peace in the valley, for the two villages had hated each other for a long, long time. One day, a new argument sparked. Both villages claimed a certain part of the stream as their own. Angry words flew across the stream. Then stones. A Gamte boy named Karun picked up a large stone and hurled it across the water. A Vayam girl named Sama stood where the stone fell. The stone hit Sama hard on the head, and she fell to the ground. The villagers of Vayam ran to help. The villagers of Gamte cheered and ran away. The Vayams called out for revenge. They were angry, and they were afraid. Would the Gamtes never stop fighting us? They gathered around Sama, admiring her courage and plotting their revenge against the Gamtes. As days passed, Sama's pain began to lessen, but her hatred of the Gamtes grew, and in the village of Gamte too, the people were angry, and they were afraid. Would the Vayams fight us always? They gathered around Karun, praising his courage and scheming how to defend against the Vayams. Karun secretly wondered how brave he had truly been, but his hatred for the Vayams only grew. One day, Sama walked along the stream, yearning for something to ease her aching, angry heart. She reached a calm pool and bent to drink. What she saw reflected there stopped her. She saw the ugly scar, but most of all, she saw her own dark, brooding scowl. "Who have I become?" she cried. Sama wept for a long time. Then Sama looked across the stream. There, a few children from Gamte walked together. How scared and angry and sad they looked. Sama's heart softened. They are just like us, she thought. Suddenly, a few of Sama's own people ran up. "Here you are," they shouted. "The time for revenge has come." And they pulled her away to join the fight. Villagers from Vayam and Gamte crowded the stream. The Vayams held a captive. It was Karun, and they all held stones. A large stone was put into Sama's hands. It was the stone that Karun had thrown. "Throw the stone at him," her people hissed. "Throw it hard." Sama looked at all the villagers, those from Vayam and those from Gamte. Their faces were like hers had been, hardened with anger and fear and hate. Suddenly, Sama knew what she had to do. "No," she said in a loud, clear voice. "I won't hurt him. Let the boy go." Her people grumbled. Sama went on. "It's time to stop the fighting," she said. "We must stop hurting and hating." And she flung the large stone to the ground. "Let us build a garden instead," she said. Now all of the people grumbled. Someone shouted, "What kind of garden?" Sama knew. A forgiveness garden. Some people gasped, some scoffed, some just laughed. But some from Vayam murmured, "If Sama wants it." They let Karun go. Then they piled their stones near Sama's. Some from Gamte saw this and murmured, "It's worth a try." They added stones of their own. Only Karun hung back, scared, angry. Stone by stone, the people of the valley built a garden wall together. But they had questions. If we forgive, must we forget all that has happened? Asked the villagers of Vayam. Sama answered, "We will sit together in the garden and decide." Must we apologize? Asked the villagers of Gamte. Will the Vayams apologize? Sama answered, "The garden will help us find what is right." Still, Karun stayed apart, watching and thinking. Villagers set flowers into the soil and planted a tree. When the garden was complete, its loveliness made everyone smile. "This garden is for all of us," Sama said. "It can help us to put aside hate and learn what forgiveness feels like. Who will join me?" At first, no one moved. No one dared. The two villages had hated each other for a long, long time. It was hard to try a new way. Then Karun, brave Karun, stepped forward. "I will join you," he said to Sama. Sama of Vayam and Karun of Gamte stepped into the garden together. They sat under a tree, and they began to talk. What do you think they said? The end. What do you think they talked about? Wouldn't it be interesting to overhear, right? It can be really hard to forgive someone who has treated you badly. And when it seems too hard for us to even think about forgiveness, think about God. He forgives us, even though we aren't always perfect. In fact, we're probably never perfect, right? We mess up probably every day and do things we think, oh, I shouldn't have done that, or I could have done better at that, right? But He loves us so much. And the other example, think of Jesus on the cross, who prays to God the Father and says, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Wow. That's kind of sums up what Jesus is all about, right? So, how do we forgive? Well, I think, like in this book, to begin to forgive is to talk and listen. To listen with an open heart. To share our real feelings and be willing to listen to what the other person has to say. And that is what God would like us to be able to do in our lives. And that's a big job, isn't it? You know, to love your neighbor as yourself sometimes requires forgiveness, right? See you next week, and we'll read another cool story. Bye-bye.